Oasis Audio presents Hattie McDaniel by Jill Watts, read for you by Bonnie Turpin. Chapter 1. Your Father Wore the Blue. Your father wore the blue, greatest sign of free men history speaks of. Wore it like a man and a soldier. Roscoe Conkling Simmons to Hattie McDaniel, January 5th, 1945. In early spring 1915, the McDaniel family of Denver, Colorado, received a questionnaire from the United States Department of Interior. A survey of veterans. It was addressed to Henry McDaniel, a former Civil War soldier who had served in Tennessee's 12th United States Colored Infantry. In failing health and with a limited education, he called upon his youngest daughter, Hattie, to help fill out the form. As her father spoke, Hattie McDaniel carefully inscribed the story of her family, detailing the events of her father's life before, during, and after the Civil War. Indeed, that war had impacted both the nation and Henry McDaniel. He had returned from battle so badly injured that it would shape the rest of his life, and later the lives of his wife and children. In many ways, although she was born almost 30 years after the conflict was over, Hattie McDaniel was a child of the Civil War. Her father's war wounds were a daily reminder of his fight for his country and against slavery and racism. On that spring day in 1915, many miles away from Hollywood, the town that would make her famous, Hattie McDaniel sat with her father, listening as he told her about his past and her history. Born into slavery in Spotsylvania County, Virginia, Henry McDaniel was never certain of his birth date. He thought it was in October, probably the 15th, and guessed that since he was able to work a plow alone by 1847, he must have been born about 1838. He seemed to have no memories of his mother or father, but he clearly recalled growing up with his older sister and younger brother on the plantation of Robert Duerson. Although Duerson was not among the largest slave owners, he came from an old Virginia planter family that had held slaves for several generations. In 1840, when Henry McDaniel was still a toddler, Duerson had 13 slaves, 7 working his fields exclusively. As was Southern practice, only the very old and the youngest, in this case Henry and his newborn brother, were exempt from labor. By the time he was 5, Henry McDaniel was put to work weeding fields and caring for Duerson's livestock. From the beginning, life was hard for Henry McDaniel. Slavery in the United States had first sprung on Virginia soil, and by the 1800s, the cruel institution was well entrenched. Slaves were defined as property and subject to the demands and whims of their masters, denied all rights, including that to marry, to hold property, to possess firearms, to vote, and in many places, to learn to read and write. Those enslaved had no protection under the law. At some point, most families were broken up by sale. The labor demanded by masters was grinding. Work days lasted from dawn to dusk. Punishments for even the most minor infractions were often whippings, some so brutal that they resulted in death. Yet those in bondage resisted slavery in a variety of ways, including working slow, pretending to be ill, running away, and maintaining separate and often secret cultural and religious practices. In some cases, slaves resorted to violence in attempts to win their freedom. In 1831, only a few years before Henry McDaniel was born, enslaved preacher Nat Turner led a
Sample complete. Ready to continue?